Evening people, this is a good one. This is one of those videos I have to be very careful how I word and can only put on certain platforms. Dare not put this on TikTok because they'll chop me off straight away. So I'm going to try and word this slightly carefully. What's it about? It's about Joe Rogan. It's about COVID. It's about ivermectin. Yes, I know, the two dreaded words that often get you banned. So Joe Rogan has a guest quite regularly on his podcast, a guy called Brett Weinstein, who is seemingly the fountain of all knowledge on so many different topics. Mega interesting guest. If you don't watch podcasts, I'd make a point of going and watching one of his with Joe Rogan. They're really good. So he did an interview very recently, and Brett Weinstein was giving him some data and some facts about COVID and about the use of ivermectin for COVID. If you're not familiar, ivermectin is a drug that's been around for about 45 years. It actually won the Nobel Prize for Medicine for use in humans. And it's an anti-parasitic drug. It was originally developed to try and treat something called river blindness, which is basically a parasite that burrows into people's eyes in the third world and eventually makes them go blind. And it was one of a number of drugs that was developed to try and combat that, and it worked brilliantly. And it's very widespread. There's been billions of doses of it used all over the world, has a great safety profile, doesn't really cause any side effects, blah, 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 blah. Very safe drug. It's also used as a deworming drug and an anti-parasitic drug in cattle and in horses and in other things as well. Anyway, when COVID came out, various scientists were trying anything to try and beat what they described as this virus. That's a whole nother story. I'm not going down that road as whether it exists or not. Anyway, just telling you what the scientists did. So they tried ivermectin, and apparently it worked. According to lots of studies, it worked. And then it was banned all over the world. They wouldn't let people prescribe it. They wouldn't let doctors prescribe it. Doctors were being struck off for prescribing it. Why is that? Anyway, listen to what Brett Weinstein has to say. Mega interesting.
Have you read Pierre Corey's book, The War on Ivermectin?
No.
Okay. There's something reported in this book that it really stops you in your tracks. It is an accidental natural experiment. Okay, so a natural experiment is something in science where maybe you happen on an archipelago in which you have a bunch of different islands that have different conditions, and you can go to each island and measure the, whatever parameter it is, because nature has given you an experiment that you can analyze. You don't have to build islands, right? In this case, what Pierre reports is that there were 80 court cases in which a family sued a hospital that was refusing to give ivermectin to a desperately sick family member, and they wanted the courts to intervene and force the hospitals to administer ivermectin. 80 cases. In 40 of those cases, the courts granted the family's request and ivermectin was administered. In 40 cases, they refused to intervene and no ivermectin was given. In 38 of the cases where ivermectin was given, the patient survived. In 2, the patient died anyway. In 38 of the cases where no ivermectin was given, the patient died, and in 2, the patient survived.
Wow.
Okay? Now, I find this is incredibly, I cannot vouch for the data itself. Because it's not published in a scientific paper, I can't go look at the methods, I can't go find the court cases. But assuming that the data is accurately reported, and I know Pierre well, he didn't make it up, so assuming that the data is accurate, the level of statistical significance on that accidental study is absolutely astronomical, right? I had Heather run a chi-squared calculation, and the p-value, I checked it also with 2 different AIs. The p-value comes out to be 5.03 times 10 to the negative 15, right? So what that means is that the chances of a result that strong, if ivermectin does not work, are something like the chances of you guessing a random 15-digit number on the first try.
Wow.
I mean, it's through the roof, right? This is a level of statistical significance we essentially never see.
And CNN turned it into a veterinary medicine.
Right. It turned you green.
Hilarious.
Right. So my point here is a couple-fold. One, the ivermectin story and the repurposed drug story more generally is a very important puzzle piece, because if repurposed drugs had been allowed to be used, if doctors had been allowed to go through the normal process of medicine that doctors go through, where they look at a patient who's ill, they see what their symptoms are, they try to figure out what might work for them, they talk to other doctors, they pool their information. If that process had been allowed to unfold, COVID is an entirely manageable disease in all but the most compromised people, right? There was no important pandemic.
What do you think about that? Now, as he quite openly says and honestly says, this can't be verified, but it was published in a book by quite an eminent physician and doctor, and I would imagine it would have been shot down in flames if it could be proven that what he's just said wasn't true. So what he's basically saying is that 80 families went to court to try and enable their family member to be given ivermectin to treat them against the symptoms of COVID that they were suffering. 40 were granted permission and 40 were not granted permission. Of the 40 that were not granted permission, i.e. who didn't take ivermectin, 38 of them died. Of the 40 who were granted permission, i.e. did take ivermectin, 40 of them survived. And as he says, to try and calculate the probability of that just happening by complete coincidence, it's trillions to one. It's impossible. There clearly is something going on there. So you have to ask the question, why was it banned globally? Why were no peer-reviewed studies allowed at that time? Why was it poo-pooed? Why did every country, every major country, ban it? Was it because it's a freely available drug? It's super, super cheap. You can give doses of it for pennies a day, and it's completely widely available. And most importantly, it was off patent. Because it's been around for so long, nobody owns the patent from it. So basically, the big pharmaceutical companies can't make any money from it. Is that why it was sidelined? Or was it just because it wasn't effective? That's the question that needs to be asked. But when you hear statistics and data like Mr. Weinstein just gave on the Joe Rogan podcast, you have to ask some very serious questions.